Hello friends, welcome to the first episode of the Artist Showcase, where I take one of my photos and I edit it in the style of a photographer that I admire. Today I am featuring the photographer Cath, who I've been a fan of for several years. She is a Canadian photographer that is known for her epic night photography and astrophotography, showcasing epic mountains. And she has a very particular style that she's very well known for. She's known for the use of a lot of blue tones in her photos, and every image that you take a look from her is just stunning. So today I've selected a photo from her that showcases big mountains, the Aurora Borealis, and I'm going to try to edit one of my photos that I took in the Rockies that also features the Aurora in her style. So let's get started. So first things first, I want to point out certain things that I noticed about Cath's image. The first thing that I notice is the sky has been desaturated quite a bit. So in the back here, you can see that it's actually not very blue. It's mostly black with a tinge of blue. So we're definitely going to have to desaturate the darker parts of our sky. I also noticed that the Aurora has been bumped up quite a bit in brightness to really draw attention to it. So that's something that we're going to have to do as well. In the mountains, we can see that the peaks of the mountains have a very magenta tint to it. It's not super strong, but it's definitely noticeable. And I think she probably took this foreground photo either at sunset or sunrise or slightly after, when the glow from the sun is kind of still hitting the peaks. So we'll definitely have to add a magenta glow to our mountains. And then in the foreground, we can notice that a lot of the elements, or most of the elements, are quite blue. So as you can see here, the clouds have a blue tint to it. So they're not perfectly white. Everything has been kind of shifted to a blue to kind of harmonize the colors. So we're going to focus on that as well. All right, let's jump into it. So the first thing I'm going to try to do is to match the colors of the image to our reference image from Cath. And Cath has a very strong usage of blues in her image. So I think the first thing that I'm going to do is to drag down the temperature of our image. Can leave it here for now. That's looking good. Let's play around with the tint as well to see if that will help us in any way. I think with Cath image, it tends towards the more kind of magenta end of the spectrum than the green end. So I think we'll leave that there. And definitely you're going to want to increase the contrast. Let's do that a bit. That's great. I think the next thing that really stands out to me in this image is the really strong enhanced aurora here. So we're going to try to recreate that effect. And here, let's try first bumping up the saturation and the brightness of the greens and see if that gives us our desired effect. Actually, let's check what color this actually is. It's actually part of the blue. So what happens if we drag it up? Oh. Yeah, unfortunately that increases the saturation of the whole sky, and we don't really want that. Let's see if we can isolate the greens in the Aurora with the point color mixer. Let's come over here and we will select this region. Let's visualize the range. We're still getting quite a bit of the sky. If we come down to the bottom, yeah, you still get quite a bit of the sky. This is going to be a tough selection to make. What happens if we just crank the saturation of that? No, that's not what we want. Let's try intersecting a luminance selector So we're going to select the sky, just the sky, and we're going to intersect that mask with a luminance range selector. We're going to select just the green parts and see if we can isolate just the aurora. No, not quite. Okay, so that's not going to work. Let's delete that luminance range and let's try selecting a color range selector. Yeah, that's a bit better, to be honest. There we go. And let's see what happens if we just crank the saturation. Ooh, that's looking crunchy. Not quite what we want. What if we increase the exposure? Yeah, that's looking a little better. And if we just dial this across to the green side. That's before, that's after. Okay, it's not bad. I think we could do better in Photoshop, but we're gonna have to live with what we can do in Lightroom. Ooh, yeah, the further we crank it to the right, the better it looks. So we're gonna stay with that. Let's try coloring it. Yeah, and that'll help us add some saturation without making it look as crunchy. I think we can probably crank up the saturation a little bit to here. Yeah, there we go. And what if we apply a color? Ooh, I like that. It's gonna try to match it to Cath's image here. I'm just kind of eyeballing here. That looks about right. Okay, so we'll take that. So if we toggle that mask on and off, you can see how big of a change that we've already made. That's looking quite good. The next thing I want to address about the sky is the darker parts of the sky. Here in Cath's image, you can see that she has desaturated most of the rest of the sky and it's quite dark. So let's see if we can isolate the darker parts of the sky in our image and also do the same thing. So essentially what I want to do is have the inverse of the selection that we made for the aurora, and that'll give us the darker parts of the sky. So I'm going to come in here, gonna right click and duplicate and invert mask. And I'm going to intersect that mask with just the sky. There we go. And let's see what happens if we just drag down. Okay, if we drag down the exposure, that starts to head us in the right direction. Obviously it's still quite blue and we want to have more of a desaturated black look to it. So I'm going to drag down the saturation as well. It's looking kind of unnatural, but hopefully as we continue to work on this image, it'll clean up a little bit. I'm just going to play around with this in the basic panel and see if we can get a natural look to it. I don't really like all this soft. There's a very stark transition between the light parts and the dark parts. And I want to kind of try to soften that up so it doesn't look as crunchy. And I wonder if some negative clarity might help with that. Helps a little bit. Okay. We'll leave it there. We'll keep playing around with this guy. I'm going to try intersecting this with a linear gradient to make the effect more gradual. Maybe something like that. And it's still got a bluish tinge to it. I'm going to try to fix that with the temp and tint and playing around with the saturation as well. It's starting to look a bit better. I'm going to try to even the aurora a little bit out so that it's not as crunchy in the sky. Yeah, just drag down the highlights a little bit. Okay, it's looking okay. We'll come back to that later. Let's address some other parts of the image. So here, it looks like she probably took the photo of these mountains during the sunset or the sunrise. So you can see that the tops of the peaks are lit up much more than the bottom area. And I did not do the same thing with this photo. So it's the mountains are somewhat more evenly lit, but we're going to try to brighten kind of the top areas of that mountain to really make it pop. So what I'm going to try here, let's try selecting landscape. Ooh, yeah, that's way better. Create mask for the mountains. I think that uses more AI, so it's a better selection. Cool. Now we're going to intersect that mask with a linear gradient. Oh, actually, I think a radial gradient might be better here because we don't want to target as much of the lower parts of the mountains on the edges here of these mountains on the side. And if we can get a curved gradient, we can kind of evenly select just the tops of these mountains. So I'm going to remove this linear gradient and I'm going to intersect instead with a radial gradient. Yeah, that's more what we want. I'm going to play a bit with the feathering and I'm going to just pump the exposure a bit. Yeah, great. It's looking pretty good. And you can see in Cath's image that she's maintained somewhat of a magenta cast on the tops of these mountains. So I'm going to drag the tint slider over to the right, to the magenta side. It's turning a bit too bluish. So I'm going to use the temperature slider as well to play around. Let's see if we can match the color. There we go. I wonder if applying a color to it could enhance the effect even further. Yeah. Okay, we'll take it. That's looking pretty cool. And then what I noticed next is that there is a pretty strong contrast between the alpine areas of the mountain, the rocks, and the lower areas, the treed areas of the mountain, which are quite dark. And here we've got the same thing happening on the right side of our image, but on the left side, we don't have as much of that contrast. So I'm going to see if I can increase the contrast here on the right side. So again, I'm going to come in and make another mask. I'm going to select the mountains again. And here we only want to work on this left side mountain. So I'm going to intersect this mask with a radial gradient so that we're only working on here. Perfect. And I'm going to drag down the blacks, just darken those dark areas. Yeah, nice. That's also definitely darkening the brighter areas. So instead, I think what I'm going to try is I'm going to intersect with a luminance range. And I'm going to select the darkest parts of that. And I think that might be better. I'm going to make the mask a little smoother. And then we're going to drag down the exposure. Yeah, I like that. And what I'm noticing now is that these darker parts of our mountain here that we're selecting here are maintaining a bit of a greenish hue, whereas in Cath's image, most of the greens have been eliminated and they're more bluish. So let's try our color applicator actually and see if we can achieve the color that we're looking for. What about our hue slider? I think that's That's a bit better. If we slide it towards the blues, yeah, that is generally better, I would say. Still want to add more of a bluish tinge to it. That's a bit better. The blues, I think in the mountains, are a bit too saturated. So I'm going to create another mask, selecting the mountains, and we're going to intersect that mask with a color range. I'm going to select the blue areas here, and we're going to just drag down the saturation a tiny bit. Okay, that looks good. And now let's pay a bit of attention to the foreground. The first thing that I notice is this kind of distracting reflection here. So I'm just going to quickly remove that. And another tiny one here. Let's remove that. And this little buoy. Do we got anything else? Yeah, in this corner we've got another buoy. Let's remove that. And this little thing. And then, yeah, that looks a lot cleaner. Oh, we've got one more here. Let's remove that. Beautiful. So I think our foreground is actually looking quite good already, but I think we can slightly make it more visually impactful by brightening the already bright areas of the lake, just to enhance the reflection effect. So I'm just gonna create a radial gradient and pull up the exposure a little bit. I might just make that a bit softer just to make it look more like a reflection. Yeah, I really like that. So it's a subtle change, but you can see that it's giving a bit of that glow. Ooh, it's really coming together. And the next thing I want to do, which you see that Cath has also done in her image, is in this lower area of her image, she's darkened it down just to draw the viewer's eye into the image. And the lower part of our image is already dark, but I think darkening it down even more will really draw the viewer's eye in. So I'm going to create a radial gradient, invert that, and we're going to, sorry, the reference image is getting a little in the way. So yeah, there we go. That's kind of the area I want to select. And we're going to just drag down the exposure and the blacks. Yeah, love that. I want to come back to the mountains now because I'm noticing that the mountains are even brighter in our image, just to give that stronger visual weight. So we're going to come back to our mountain mask here, and I'm going to drag up maybe the highlights even more. Yeah, bit on the exposure too. Beautiful. Okay, I think we're pretty close here. Now that I'm looking at the image, I feel like this bottom left corner is a bit distracting. This kind of bright spot, it's really pulling my eye away from the middle of the image. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove that. And to be honest, I am not, the sky looks cool, but because of the giant contrast between these kind of softer areas of the aurora with the dark sky, it kind of looks quite smudgy. And honestly, I don't think that's something that I can fix with only Lightroom tools. So I might just bring this into Photoshop quickly to clean that up. So I'm going to edit in Photoshop. Okay. And what I'm going to try here, I think, is to blur out these softer areas of the aurora just to make it look less smudgy, and we can brush on that blurriness. So I'm going to duplicate this later with Command J, just so that we can do some non-destructive editing. I'm going to filter. I'm going to go to blur and Gaussian blur and just kind of drag to a point where those smudges kind of just blend in. Yeah, okay, that looks pretty good. 25 maybe, a bit higher, 30. Let's go with 30. And we're gonna mask that and invert our mask and start painting in the sections that we want the effect to be applied. Let's see how this looks. This could totally not look good and we'd have to try another way, but yeah, let's go for it. I'm gonna come to my brush and come to a low opacity so I can brush in that effect slowly. 20% is probably good. Set the foreground color as white so we can paint white on this black mask. And yeah, let's get to painting. Let's just target these smudgy areas. Yeah, these are top now. Yeah. And let's see what kind of effect that we're getting. It's subtle, but it seems to look a little better, at least in my opinion. Yeah, definitely looking less smudgy. And I think the other thing that's making it not look so good is because there is that kind of hazy transition between the very bright parts of the aurora and the dark sky. So I wonder if we can do like a luminance selector on this hazy part and just drag down the exposure a little bit to make the transition more abrupt and not as kind of drawn out through the sky. So let's see, I'm going to come in here and select color range, and we're going to do, yeah, maybe sampled colors, and we're going to come in and select just that hazy part and see if we can isolate that. Yeah. I think we can get something to work here. See here, the white parts are the parts that we're selecting, and you can see that it's avoiding the brightest parts of the aurora, and it's just selecting the hazy parts. We can always adjust this later. Sorry, I think we need to create a new layer so we can apply that mask on it first. Sorry. And we're gonna do a curves layer. We're gonna come select color range. Gonna select this hazy area and drag that down. Yeah, that's okay. I think that's probably good. Okay, select okay. And we only want it in the sky right now. If we show the mask, you can see it's also selecting these luminance areas in the bottom, and we want just the sky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to brush in, just remove those those foreground areas with the brush. There we go. Just get rid of all of that. So we're only selecting the sky. Okay. So we've only got the sky now, and let's see what happens if we drag down our curves. Ooh. Yeah, if we go too far, you can see that it's not exactly what we want. But if we come down just a little bit, that already, I think, improves it quite a bit. Yeah, that's looking way better. Way better. Okay, that's something we can live with. Just gonna play around a bit more with this. It's looking better for sure. We will take it. coming back here into Lightroom, one final touch that I want to make is make that upper sky even more dark. So if we come here, we select sky, we're gonna select our luminance range here and select the darker parts. Yeah, there we go. We want a smooth transition so our image doesn't look crunchy. We're gonna come there, and then we're going to intersect that with a linear gradient and just drag from the top. See what happens if we just reduce that exposure even more. Let's drag down the blacks. Yeah, drag down the blacks. And we're going to increase the whites. Now we've got a very black sky. Just gonna reduce that saturation even more. Bring up the whites even more. So the only part of the image that I'm unhappy with now is this upper left part of the Aurora, which is looking still very smudgy. I'm gonna try to clean that up a little bit more. It's tough. I'm gonna reduce the texture. Yeah, that's a bit better. It just stands out a lot. What if we reduce the clarity too? Yeah. Okay. I think that does help it to stand out a little less. Okay. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. So you can be the judge of how this looks. And just to show our before and after, this was our before. And on the left, we have our after. Pretty cool.